Thank you all for bringing your lunch and coming out to another Lowell lecture. Today with Dr. Hal Whitehead, who will be talking about sperm whales. I know some of you are familiar with Dr. Whitehead and his work. It's a distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you here and to have a moment to introduce you. Dr. Whitehead is a Killam professor at Dalhousie University, where he's held positions since 1985. When he started there, he was the Isaac Walton Killam Postdoctoral Research Fellow. One of his first research positions was working with Dr. Roger Payne at the New York Zoological Society in 1975 and 1976. So he's been working on whale research for quite a long while. Between those institutions, he continued his work at the Newfoundland Institute for Cold Ocean Sciences. In addition to his research professorship, he's held other positions on the Committee for the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, a member and the co-chair of the Marine Mammal Subcommission, starting in 2001. Also the Species Survival Commission, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and a member of the Cetacean Specialist Group since 1983. And he's also on the International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee, and as an invited expert, where he served in 1986 and 1988. He did his bachelor's in pure mathematics at Cambridge University, and his master's at Cambridge University, where his dissertation was on a statistical analysis of the development of play behavior in kittens. So his animal species range from whales to certainly other mammals, and actually beyond that as well. His publications are far too numerous to mention. There are 14 pages that look like this. But I want to note that he's recently, he has a publication in Press about do pigs form preferential associations. He also works on pigs, and he's also working on an analysis of Spix's disc-winged bat. So he his expertise spans well beyond sperm whales, but that's the focus of his talk today. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, John, and thank you very much for inviting me. My family, my mother's family, comes from Boston, and I used to spend a lot of time here. I haven't been back for quite a while, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Please don't ask me about pigs or bats. I'm the sort of statistician on the teams that were looking into those. But there'll be no statistics in what I'm going to talk about today. What I'm going to talk about today is the sperm whale, which is a completely wonderful animal, and I hope I can convince you of that. Herman Melville subtitled his book, Moby Dick, The Whale. But in fact, the sperm whale is nothing like any other whale. And in fact, it's nothing much like any other species on Earth. Although there are one or two similarities with another interesting species, which I'll talk about at the end here. But mainly I'm going to talk about society and culture and how we study them using sailboats at sea. So I'll say something about the sperm whale, how we study them, their societies, their cultures. All this will be about females, so I'll have a little bit about the guys, and then something about the future. I'd like to thank all those who collected the data, and there were a lot of them, those who analyzed the data, who are mostly graduate students at Dalhousie University, the funding sources, especially the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada and the National Geographic Society. Most of the beautiful pictures I'm going to show were taken by Flip Nicklin, the National Geographic photographer. I'm very grateful to him for letting me use them. Emezi Kassar drew the diagrams I'm going to show, and the whales themselves put up with us following them around for days and weeks, remarkably tolerantly, and I'm very grateful to them. And finally, my family, and especially my wife Lindy, allow me to go out to sea and spend time with the whales, and in especially good times they come out with us. So, the sperm whale. It's an animal of extremes. Here's a picture of a sperm whale at a Canadian whaling station. It's enormous, and in fact, this is the largest of the toothed whales, the largest animal on Earth except for a few rather obese baleen whales. But what you see here is what gave the sperm whale its strange name. It's the spermaceti organ. It's not sperm. The whalers weren't very good at anatomy. But what it is what you can see here is the world's most powerful natural sonar system. So this is a cross-section through the head of the whale, and this is filled up with a very high grade of oil. There's all kinds of other things going on here, air passages looping around, a huge muscle around everything. And recent work, especially by Bertel Mohl and colleagues in Denmark, has shown that this is a sonar system. It makes incredibly powerful clicks, which go out into the world, reflect off things, and bring back information. So, also in the head of the sperm whale is the largest brain on Earth. I guess that's somewhere around here. We don't know much more about it, what it's used for, how good it is at thinking, but it's very, very large, larger than any other brain. The sperm whale is probably the deepest mammalian diver, going down at least below 2,000 meters and probably further. They're eating deep water squid. Here are some of the species that they eat, some quite small guys and some much larger ones. Now, if you add up how many sperm whales there are, how much they eat, it works out that the sperm whales today are taking perhaps 100 million metric tons out of the ocean per year. Now, to put that in perspective, that's a bit more than we manage to take out of the ocean with all our fisheries worldwide. Another extreme is in the sex differences. The females are pretty big animals. 15 tons is a fairly substantial animal. But the males are very, very much larger. Here's a male beside some females, 3 times the mass. And the difference in habitat is even more dramatic. The females are mostly found in the tropics and subtropics. But the larger males are principally in much higher latitudes. So here off Boston, if you went off to the deeper waters, you would find females perhaps, but you would be right at the limit at which you would find them. When you move north to Nova Scotia, we only find males. There are also social differences between the sexes, which I'll go into in a bit. So we get this great range of extremes linked to this one animal. I've gone through many of these, but I'm told by the Danish group that the muscle going around the spermaceti organ is the largest muscle on Earth, or the strongest muscle on Earth. It also, down here, is the longest intestine on Earth. I don't know how that all fits in. And another thing that relates to this is commercial importance. And during the 18th and 19th century, the whalers in this region made the sperm whale one of the world's, perhaps the world's most commercially important animal. And this led into its importance in human culture through people like Herman Melville. So there were 2 massive hunts. The first one depicted here between it started in 1712 when a Nantucket whaler took his first sperm whale, but it really got going in the mid-18th century and went on through the 19th century. And the sperm whales got a bit of a respite around then, and then modern whalers got into the act and slaughtered huge numbers of them, especially in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This picture is it gives a rather false impression. The whalers, despite their rather primitive methods, were much more dangerous to the whales than the whales were to the whalers. Okay. So, now I'll talk a little bit about sperm whale research. Until the early 1980s, almost all sperm whale research was wrapped up with the whaling industry. And in fact, some of the scientists believed it could be done really no other way. So, for instance, Seiji Izumi said that the study of the behavior of living sperm whales is almost impracticable technically and economically. And of course, the corollary of this was he needed the whaling industry to continue so that he could continue to study sperm whales. But in 1981, through a rather strange set of circumstances, the World Wildlife Fund in the Netherlands sent Jonathan Gordon and myself aboard this 33-foot boat into the Indian Ocean to try to study living sperm whales. We didn't know too much about sperm whales. We knew even less about the Indian Ocean, and it was a very interesting time. But we developed a range of techniques for studying living sperm whales. So we followed the charts which showed where the old Yankee whalers, the whalers from New Bedford and Nantucket and so on, made their kills, going through the Red Sea, going to the Arabian grounds, and then we found a bunch of sperm whales here off Sri Lanka and spent a couple of years there trying to develop methods of studying living sperm whales. Well, the first thing we had to do was to find the sperm whales. Sperm whales are big, but they're not terribly easy to see. As you can see here, there is a sperm whale here, but it's not very prominent. They're much less easy to sight, for instance, than right whales. But they have an advantage. That great sonar system is in operation most of the time. So let's see if this works. This is a recording made on the Scotian Shelf in a full gale. So there's a lot of water noise, but even despite this, a nearby sperm whale comes through very clearly. So that bang, bang, bang is the sperm whale echolocating in its environment. And the way we worked out to do this is, well, we always look our best at sea. And down below our boat, we have a directional hydrophone. A hydrophone is an underwater microphone, and by turning this wheel here, you twist what's the hydrophone underneath, so it listens in different directions. And what we normally hear, because we're normally following groups of female sperm whales, is not just one guy clicking away like we just heard, but a whole bunch of them. And so this is more normally what you'd hear when studying females in the tropics. So that's 10 to 15 sperm whales clicking away all together. And it makes a really nice signal. And so by this means, we can follow groups of sperm whales for up to a week. We can follow them day and night just by listening to their sounds. When we're with them, we collect a bunch of data. Now, photography is key to studying whales, and we use the most experienced technicians and the finest equipment. And get some great pictures, like this wasn't taken with that camera. And we can identify the animals from the patterns of marks and scars along the trailing edge of their flukes. This is a sperm whale diving, and so this pattern allows us to identify the animals, and we have a catalog just like you guys have a right whale catalog. And at the moment we have about 3,000 animals in it. And we use this to keep track of who's whom, where they are, who's with whom, and so on. We also study diet. The sperm whales shit, like any other mammal, and when we see a brown patch, we head over and gather what we can. And what we can often get are these squid beaks, which tell us the size and species of the squid that the whale has eaten. Sometimes the whales are messy eaters, and sometimes we can actually pick up bits of the squid themselves. More recently, we've concentrated a lot on genetic work, and to do this, we go along behind the whales and pick up what you might call whale dandruff, bits of skin that the whales leave behind them. They're not all this big and nice, but even for quite small pieces, you can get out the DNA and work out genetic relatedness and that kind of thing. So using these techniques, we developed these techniques in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, at the end of that study, the Sri Lankan Civil War started, and it made it basically impossible to continue the work there. So together with Lindy, my wife, and a couple of other veterans of the Sri Lanka studies, we moved our work to the Galapagos Islands and worked there for the next 15 years off and on. And much of what I'll talk about comes from these studies off the Galapagos. So, I guess I'm nosy. What I'm really interested in social structure and society. So this incredible picture by Flip Nicklin, what comes into my mind is, what is it between these guys? Are they just like this because there's a nice big squid up here? Or are they like this because there's something important going on? These animals are bonded. Maybe they're sisters. Maybe they spend their lives together. So a lot of our work has been trying to figure this out. And to cut a long story short, this is the picture that we get. The fundamental element of sperm whale social structure is what we call the social unit, which has about 11 animals in it, females and immatures. This has nearly permanent membership. We find the units with almost the same individuals in them 10 years later. When we look at the genetics, we find there are matrilines. So that might be a mother, these her daughters, and that her granddaughter. But they're also unrelated members. So these other ones might be totally unrelated to these ones. But they still go around together, and we can't detect any preference as to who swims with whom, whether they're related or not. It seems to be a very homogeneous society. However, at sea, you don't usually see one social unit. What you usually see is what we call a group, which is about 2 social units, and they move together for about very roughly 10 days, sometimes just a few hours, sometimes longer. But the group moves along coherently for a few days together, and can travel very large distances. When they're traveling, their behavior can be separated into 2 really quite different kinds of behavior. About 3/4 of the time, they are foraging. The animals are diving, lifting their tails like this. We hear the usual clicks, the click, 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 as they search the oceans for squid. The whales are spread out, and they're going about 4 kilometers an hour, so about 2 miles an hour or so. About 1/4 of the time, and often in the afternoon, we English used to call it tea time, they stop this diving, they gather at the surface. Often they're completely silent, but we also hear strange coda vocalizations. That's a coda. It's a pattern of clicks. They make these patterns when they are socializing close together at the surface like this. Codas were first discovered by Bill Cheville and Bill Watkins from Woods Hole, and unfortunately Bill Watkins died very recently. They are usually moving slowly, and in what I talk about later on, these coda vocalizations, which we record when they're socializing, will be very prominent. Now, these females in the social unit work together in a number of ways, and one of them is looking after their offspring. They seem to suckle each other's offspring, and they certainly babysit each other's offspring. So, unlike most other large whales, if these were humpback whales, this would probably be the mother. If these were right whales, again, that would probably be the mother. These are sperm whales, and It may be the mother, it may be another female in the group, it may be a young male. So the young calves move between the different adults in the group and immatures. What we found is that if there's a group without a calf, they will often synchronize their dives. So if you have a dozen whales in a group, they may all dive together, and then there'll be a pause when you don't see anything at the surface. They're all down there clicking and feeding, and then after about 40 minutes they'll come up again to breathe before diving again. In a group with a calf, they stagger their dives like this. And what happens is the calf may be with this guy. When she dives, the calf will move to this one, and so on. So in this way, they provide active babysitting for their young. The calves seem to go for anything that's about mum-sized, and including our boat here. You can see this is a very little one with the umbilical cord. And sperm whales are faced, there's a reason for this, they're faced with predators. Here's a killer whale which has just been trying to attack these sperm whales. The sperm whales have beaten this guy off, and in fact in this attack they beat off the sperm whales, and there were a few scratches. They beat off the killer whales. There were a few scratches, but nothing very serious. But in other cases, the killer whales have managed to kill sperm whales. In 1992 to 1993, I had my first sabbatical. Sabbaticals are a great feature of teaching at universities. And so what we did was, Lindy and I took our kids, put them on the boat, and sailed around the South Pacific like this, and listening for sperm whales. And the circles indicate where we found sperm whales. So we went from Panama through Polynesia to New Zealand, back to Easter Island, Chile, and then up the coast. And all along here, we were recording the sounds of the sperm whales, we were photo-identifying them, and collecting samples for genetic analysis. By this time, we had a somewhat larger 40-foot boat. Here's shown off the Galapagos. This is the boat we still have. It's a great boat for this kind of research, and we've taken it many thousands of miles studying sperm whales. We photo-identified the whales. We have here, this is my daughter Stephanie, who was 10 months when we left, and gives a kind of new meaning to poop deck. As I said, one of the things we were interested in were the coders. And in fact, at this point, my wife, Lindy Walgott, was studying them. They're patterned series of clicks used for communication. And I'll just play them another set of coders, because these are fundamental to what we... So it's kind of like a Morse code. And first I'm going to talk about the situation in the Galapagos, and then expand it to what we found when we went around the South Pacific. We found that the social units that we studied could be classified into 3 clans. There's the regular clan. These social units make coders like click, 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 with the clicks regularly spaced. There's the +1 clan, who make clicks click, 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 click. The Canadian A, you might say. And then there was one strange unit which just appeared at the end, unit T, which made a totally different set of coders, just short little coders. Click, 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 that kind of thing. Because we studied the same unit in different years, we found that the repertoires of the units were stable over years, and we found that the units grouped with units of their own clan. So regular units stayed with regular units, +1, grouped with +1 clans. Short wasn't able to it because there was only one unit of this clan in the Galapagos. We found that not only did these units have different what you might call dialects, but they also had different distributions. In 1987 and 1989, we collected a bunch of data on the units from 2 clans, the +1 and the regular. And these are the Galapagos Islands in yellow. And we found that the regular units were close to the islands, and the +1 units were about 20 kilometers further from the islands, We also found they had different movement patterns and different feeding success. So the regular units, the units of the regular clan, go click, 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 are found close to the islands. They had wiggly paths. They kept going back on themselves. And these guys did really well when it was cold off the Galapagos. Well, relatively cold. It never gets very cold off the Galapagos, but it gets down to about 20 degrees, which is cold for the equator. And these guys did really well in these cold conditions. Contrast the +1 units, click, 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 were found further from the islands. They moved in straight lines, and they did okay in the cold water, but not as well as the regular. However, when El Nino strikes and everything warms up, and it's really bad for all marine creatures just about, including sperm whales, the +1 clan units did relatively better. So, why? This seems a strange situation. What's going on here? Why does this unit make one kind of coders behave in a certain kind of way, and this unit behave in another kind of way? Well, genes might be one. These might be kind of different subspecies, but in fact, when we looked at the genes, there's in fact very little difference in the genes in the different units. Environment, note that found in the same area. Age or sex groups, well, you think maybe the regular ones are the young ones and the +1 are the old ones, or vice versa. Nope. Each clan contains huge segments of sperm whale populations. Young ones, old ones, and everything in between. And in fact, if you can rule all these three things out, about the only thing that is left is culture. Culture is what we learn from each other and what sperm whales learn from each other. So what seems to be happening is that a young female sperm whale learns a whole bunch of stuff from her mum and the other females in her social unit, including the dialect, including the way they move around, and probably a range of other things. Well, when we then brought in our work from the South Pacific, we found there were about 5 clans, and I've represented their ranges here in different colors, which have come out a bit odd on the screen, but perhaps you can see what's happened. This one, the blue, is the +1 clan. Click, 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 click. The regular clan is found down here, from the Galapagos down to northern Chile. And that unit T, that strange unit which had these strange coders, well, in fact, we found units with those coders right across the Pacific. It's this one. So it was weird in the Galapagos, but not weird by the whole South Pacific standards. And there's another clan we found only in the Caribbean. So there are 4 to 5 clans in the South Pacific. The range of the clans, if you see how far each clan goes, seems to be about 2,000 to 10,000 kilometers. And because we know roughly how many females there are in the South Pacific, we can tell that each clan contains tens of thousands of females. And the clans, members of the same clan, are not necessarily relatives. They may be no more closely related to the females in their own clan than females in another clan. Now, from a zoologist's perspective, this is weird. If you think about it, there's not much like this. Killer whales have something similar, but they have, in fact, they do have clans which have some of the same characteristics, but each clan contains 100 or 200 females in killer whales. In fact, the closest you get to this is us. Here's a whole bunch of individuals, maybe thousands of them. They're behaving in a coordinated way. They have markers which say we're one group and there's probably another group over here which is dressed differently. So similarly to the sperm whales have one coda or another coda pattern. And this has been called ultrasociality. In animals, you find ultrasociality, in other words, a whole bunch of animals working together to achieve something in the social insects, in ants and bees and so on. But in this case, it's due to a strange genetic system. You also find it in humans, where it's due to culture. And it looks to me as though we're getting the same pattern in sperm whales, and probably in sperm whales it's also due to culture. So I conclude from this that sperm whale cultural clans structure sperm whale societies and populations, and the female sperm whales are cultural animals. A lot of what they do depends on what they learn from their moms and the other females in their group. They're, in some sense, multicultural. Off the Galapagos, you find three different clans with different cultures. Similarly, the killer whales on the west coast of Canada and the US, you find the similar multicultural society. You get groups of killer whales with different cultures in the same area. They are ultra-social, so you get sociality over very large scales. So I've been talking about females. I'm going to say a little bit now about the guys, because when I give a talk like this and I don't mention the guys, I'm always asked about them. So here they are. The boys leave their mom at about age 6. They become sexually mature in their teens. They keep growing until they're really late, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as the male gets bigger, he moves to higher and higher latitudes. So the very biggest males you might find off the ice edge of Greenland or in the Antarctic. You find these males in what the whalers call bachelor groups. When we've studied them a bit, we find them pretty loose. They don't have the same structure as the female groups. If you find two males together today, they're very unlikely to be together tomorrow or in a week or a month or a year. When the males get into their late 20s, they return to the tropics to breed. When they're in the breeding area, they rove singly between the groups of females. So if you're following a group of females, which is what we do, you find a male who comes in and spends a few hours with the group, and then he leaves. He may come back the next day or in a week or so, but it's just a short visit. As the males are doing this, they make a distinctive slow click. Oops. There's a lot of noise on that, but every 6 or 7 seconds there's a very loud ringing click. These are very loud. You can hear them at about 40 kilometers, and probably the whales can hear them much further than that. The males occasionally fight with each other, and they have scars on their nose to show it, but these seem to be pretty rare. When we follow them, what seems to be happening, and this I think would come as a surprise to Herman Melville and most of the Yankee whalers, is that it's not the great big male who's figuring out who breeds, who decides whom he wants to breed with. It's in fact the females. Sometimes, as shown in the bottom here, the females think the male who's arrived is great, and you can see they get all excited. You hear lots of codas, they come rushing over to him, and you see this kind of thing. Other times the male comes in making the big click, struts in, and all the females say forget it, they dive, and then he slinks off into the background. So it looks to us as though female choice probably has a fair amount to say about who breeds, and it also may have something to say about why the males are so big. And the males are so big perhaps because the females like big males. I'm going to end by saying a little bit about the status of sperm whales now and how it might be in the future. This is my estimate of the population of sperm whales over the last 300 years. So I estimate there were about 1 million sperm whales when sperm whaling started, when that Nantucket whaler killed his first sperm whale in 1712. In the 18th century, relatively few sperm whales were killed, mainly because the whalers stuck in the Atlantic. And they killed a lot of sperm whales here in the Atlantic, and especially in the waters in this area. But about 1800, they moved through into the Pacific, into the Indian Oceans, where there were huge numbers of sperm whales, and they killed huge numbers of sperm whales. But even so, as far as I can tell, there was still quite a lot of sperm whales left. And the population probably recovered a bit as sperm whaling became relatively rare around 1900. However, after the Second World War, with many of the big baleen whale populations destroyed, the blue whales, fin whales, right whales, and so on, the whalers turned their attention to the sperm whales, and the population dropped precipitously. Sperm whaling virtually ended in 1986 with the commercial moratorium on whaling. And according to my population model, the population should have regrown a little bit over the last 20 years or so. However, unfortunately, this is a purely theoretical increase. There is actually no evidence from anywhere that populations of sperm whales have increased over this period. And it may be too optimistic because these animals are threatened by a range of threats. And I'll just mention a few of them. One of the ones that concerns us most is broken social structure. In species like sperm whales or elephants, in which animals, in particular females, depend a lot on each other, if you kill some of the females, it makes life harder for the ones that are left. So they found, for instance, that in elephant groups, which have similar social structure to sperm whales, if the matriarch is killed, then the reproductive rate of the females that are left, their survival rate, the rate they survive, goes down. And we may have had the same thing happening in sperm whales. Sperm whales also, because they eat fairly high on the food web, have high chemical loads. We don't know what the effects of that are. There are bycatches in fisheries, especially in the Mediterranean, but also other places in the world. And there's particular concern at the moment about noise. This here is not a sperm whale, it's a Cuvier's beaked whale on the right. This is an animal that was killed during naval exercises off the Canaries, and it's becoming increasingly clear that Cuvier's beaked whales, other beaked whales, are being killed routinely by naval exercises. And maybe other times we put noise into the ocean, such as seismic surveys. Now, sperm whales, like the beaked whales, are deep divers. They have some physiological similarities to the beaked whales, so they may also be at threat from noise, although we don't know that yet. The Japanese are still killing sperm whales, only a very few at the moment, but Seiji Izumi, who's still at it, he's head of the Japanese Whale Research Institute, and they kill a few sperm whales every year, apparently for Seiji. So I'm hoping Seiji will retire soon and sperm whaling can really come to an end. And there are other possible threats, such as ship strikes. So, in summary, the sperm whale is extreme in form, extreme in its effect on its habitat and how much food it eats. It's unusual in its behavior. The females, at least, are highly social. They seem to be cultural and have a form of ultra-sociality, as we do. And they've had a long and complex relationship with humans. And finally, it's really fun to study them. There's nothing quite like What I like best, perhaps, is it's at night. The rest of the crew's asleep below, and it's just you up there with the whales. You can hear them on the hydrophones. You can hear them blowing, and you steer the boat to sail after them. It's great. Anyway, thanks for having me here, and that's it. Sure, if there are some questions. Yes?
How did you get your estimate? How did you get your population estimation for 1700?
Yeah.
How do you get that data?
The way we got it was first what I did was try to figure out how many there are around today. And the way I did that was there have been surveys for sperm whales in a fair proportion of the world's oceans, mainly by the US government. So the US government has done surveys through much of the North Pacific. There have been surveys in the Antarctic and so on. And it works out there have been surveys in about a quarter of the world's sperm whale habitat. So I then extrapolated from the estimates for the surveyed areas to the whole world by, three ways. One was just area-wise, multiplying by 4 roughly. Second, by looking at the proportion of kills by the Yankee whalers in the areas that had been surveyed over the total, and thirdly by looking at the amount of primary production in the surveyed areas as the unsurveyed ones. And they all come up with more or less the same answer. So we get 360,000 today, roughly. And then we know how many, again, roughly, have been killed each decade, going all the way back to about 1800. There is some error there, but and so you can work back and, making some assumptions, come up with that curve. When I did it technically, I put in I considered the variation in all the things put in. So that curve looks really good. But when I present this to a scientific audience, I'll show the variability around that, and it's quite substantial. So that's roughly how it happens. Yes, at that.
Can you tell us more about do the sperm whales use sonar in their hunting technique beyond just location?
Yeah. The way it's beginning to look with the sperm whale sonar is the sperm whale dives and goes down maybe 200-300 meters, and then it starts making these what we call usual clicks. Click, 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 about every half to 1 second. And that seems to be a generalized searching sonar, so they're looking ahead of them for their stuff. When they find something, what we hear are what we call creaks, and it goes, and which seems to be the animal homing in on the food. And then sometimes there's a pause after the end of the creak, which we presume is when it's actually eating it, and then the click, click, click will start up. So that's and then when the whale's been down for about 30-40 minutes, the clicks will stop and the whale will come up, and about 5 minutes later it'll break the surface.
Is there any validity to you sometimes hear that some sonar is used to disable their prey? Is that true?
There is a theory that they could use these clicks to disable their prey. It may be true. At the moment, there's no evidence for it. The sperm whale click is incredibly loud. If you've swam with sperm whales and they've echolocated off you, as I have, it's an extraordinary feeling. And you could see how it could potentially harm something. However, these deep water squid don't have air bladders or very obvious organs which could be disabled. So we don't know. It's still a theory. Yes?
Can you give us a little frame of reference to our own terrestrial life here about what you mean when you say that it's very loud when you're swimming with them and they're echolocating off of you? And the other thing is, could you say a little bit about the kinds of gestures that the whales have as they're hanging together in various kinds of postures and positions?
Yeah. When they echolocate off you, the sperm whale click is a broadband click. It has a wide range of frequencies of tones in it. I personally feel the low ones more. Your whole body is sort of going thud, right? But you also hear the very loud, higher frequency sounds through your ears. Yeah, I think that's really all I can say about that. As far as their gestures, yes, their behavior when they're socializing is extremely variable. Sometimes they'll just lie quietly side by side, almost doing nothing. Sometimes they'll be touching each other. You can see them using their flippers to touch each other. We've seen them going jaw to jaw or kissing each other, you might say. So there's a huge amount of variability there. And we haven't swum with them that much. And so we've only seen a small fraction of it, and everything else is sort of is interpolated from what we can see from the surface. And it's pretty hard to see stuff from the surface. Yeah, if you didn't hear that, the question was, is there a hierarchy or decision-making among the females? And we initially expected something like that because for a lot of this work, the model that we've used to kind of frame hypotheses has been that of elephants, because the elephant's social system is similar to the sperm whale and the sperm whale social system, and there's a very strong hierarchy in female elephants with a matriarch and so on. However, I'm not sure in elephants whether that determines who breeds. I think it's more who determines whether we go feed now or drink now. In sperm whales, we found very little evidence for any kind of hierarchy or even any kind of preference. It seems, from what we can tell, and of course it's very hard to tell, to be a fairly homogeneous society. So if we look at who dives first or who dives with whom, we find no particular trend for one animal to dive first, or even particular pairs to dive together within a social unit. When you get two units together forming a group and they're going along together, then there's very clear preferences. So the members of one unit prefer to be with members of their own unit, and the other one with their unit. So we are able to tell that level of preferences, but when we look within the unit, we can find very little. And I guess I wonder whether, I mean, this may be partly because it's just really hard to study them, and if we could study them better, we would find the same kind of things people have found with elephants. But I wonder also whether the deep ocean is a place where it's really hard to monopolize things, to defend things. So it makes it a harder place for there to be competition for anything very physical, except for the males competing for females. But apart from that, it's hard to see how the females would actively compete for anything. And so it's possible that we do have a more homogeneous society than we would expect from the models we have for mammals on land.
I was interested with a graphic of the diving behavior when there are calves present versus not calves present. Is there any evidence to support that they're actually coordinating their feeding at depth when they all go down at the same time and come up at the same time? Or are they spread out?
I don't think they're coordinating their feeding, but it's just, again, a hypothesis. What seems to happen when they coordinate their feeding is that they're coordinating their social behavior. So they're all being social together, and so they all decide, hey, tea time's over, we've got to go and get on with it. And so they all dive together, and that sets up synchrony, right? And you can sometimes see the synchrony gradually break down with time after the socializing. With the ones with calves in it, they seem to deliberately, I guess, make it asynchronous when they start diving after the socialization. So, yes?
How were you able to differentiate the animals that were doing well after the El Nino year versus not doing so well?
Okay, the question, if you didn't hear it, was how could we tell whether they were doing well or not so well after an El Nino year? Well, the way we do it is we make the assumption that what comes out must have gone in, and we count brown patches behind the whales, okay? So that when the whales dive, we go over to the slick they leave when they dive and look for a brown patch. And then we record, yes, there was one, no, there wasn't, or we couldn't tell. And what you find is that when conditions are good, that the maximum rate is about 20% of the dives have shit in them. And in an El Nino year, it goes down to almost zero. Maybe 2 to 3, 4% would be about the best, and that only from the +1 clan. So the shit rate of the regular clan, the inshore ones, in the good non-El Nino years, when the waters are cool, is about 15% on average. The shit rate of the regular, of the +1 clan, the offshore one, is about 9%, something like that. And then when the El Nino strikes, the inshore ones have virtually no shit at all, and the other ones up to about 2, 3, 4%, something like that.
Do you see changes in body composition or in terms of the survivability of calves?
We've looked at survivability of calves, and there's an indication that there's a lag there. When you move about, I think it's 2, 3 years after an El Nino, there seem to be rather few calves. But that's based on very few data, because El Ninos don't happen very often, and we haven't done as much research as we'd have liked to have done. So that's kind of tentative. As far as body composition, no, we haven't got good measures on that. I think the techniques that you guys have developed with right whales, it'd be really nice to try and apply some of them to sperm whales, but we haven't done that yet. Yes?
What are the theories of the function of such a small jaw for crustaceans?
So the functions of the small jaw, well, it's not all that small. I mean, this is about 10 feet long, which is, I guess, it depends on your perspective. But I suppose from a right whale perspective, it is a small jaw. But the way it seems to work is that the jaw isn't a vital part of feeding, because sperm whales without jaws have been found with plenty of squid in their stomachs and perfectly healthy in other respects as far as they could tell. And what seems to happen is the animal gets close to the sperm whale, gets close to the squid by echolocation, maybe vision as well when they get very close. And then they have, it doesn't show in this one, but there's a couple of ventral grooves here, just short ones, not like with the baleen whales. And this allows them, they've got a wonderful suction here, so they can just suck the squid in. So, given this, what's the jaw about? Well, we don't know, but you can see on this is the male, well, perhaps you can just about see there's a bunch of scars here. And some of these are probably made by the jaws of other males. And there's also this wonderful white lining to the jaw, which suggests perhaps that the principal function of this is in social matters, in communication. Both the females also have the white lining to the jaw. So it may be a way they can signal to each other. You do see them, for instance, mouthing their calves, or the kissing thing when they open their jaws and go like this. So, yes?
I'm wondering the obligatory about the guy's question. What do you ever hear recognizable codas from solitary males, and are they consistent with the group unit?
Yeah, the codas from the males, this is an interesting question. We have rarely heard them. In the other side of the Atlantic, off Norway and in the Mediterranean, they hear one special coda from males, and it's 3 + 1, click, 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 click. And that's virtually the only one that's ever been heard from a male. And they seem to make them as they come to the surface at the end of a long dive. So not in obviously social circumstances like the females. We have one of these graduate students who works with me, Marianne Marcoux. She just did a very interesting analysis. We have, to do our work on codas, we've a sample of, I think, 15,000 codas. And each click in each coda gives you an estimate of the length of the whale, because the click that the sperm whale makes, it bounces back and forth in the head, and it has, it's made up of several pulses. And so the time delay between the pulses gives you an idea of the length of the whale. It's very cool. So just by recording them, you can say she was 8.6 meters long or whatever. So she took all these 15,000 coders and worked out how long the whale who made them was. And virtually all of them were made by animals between 9 and 11 meters long, which is 9 is when a female becomes mature, 11 is the longest length for a mature female. Becomes sexually mature. She becomes sexually mature about 9 meters, which suggests that coders are almost entirely made by sexually mature females. There are no good cases in that sample set, even though, in many cases there was a male around, of coders being made by the big males, very few of them being made by the smaller females or smaller males. So it seems to be an interesting vocalization that's just, or nearly just, made by mature females. And you think, well, what's that about? Well, these coders were recorded when males were around and when they weren't, when we were sure there were no males anywhere near. So it doesn't seem to be involved in mating, or not always. They were made when there were calves around and when there were not calves around. So it's not just involved in looking after baby or communicating with baby. It seems that it's for communicating with the other females. And so the word that comes to mind, although I'm told this is pejorative and I shouldn't use it, is gossip. And there's a theory that humans use speech in the form of gossip as a way of, instead of grooming. So primates, the other primates all groom each other and thereby cement their social bonds. And humans don't need to groom so much because we don't have lots of hair. And secondly, we have so many social relationships that, in fact, if we spent time grooming all the people we're friends with, we wouldn't have time to do anything else. So instead, we use speech, and we talk about the weather and stuff that may or may not mean a whole lot, and cement our social bonds that way. And so the thought is maybe that's what's going on here too.